Hello and welcome to episode 60 of Paper Tuesdays with Michael Dwyer and Mark Halpin. Michael, would you like to introduce our guest?
This is going to be a great one. We're joined by soon-to-be Dr. Aoife Drury. Well, in a few years, Aoife, so surely looking forward to that. Aoife's background is she was a psychiatric nurse and then has moved on to psychotherapy and focuses specifically on psychosexual therapy and has a background in the UK, and now she's studying in DCU, and we're delighted to have you, Aoife. Thanks for coming on to Paper Tuesdays.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm pretty excited to have a chat with you guys, because as I said before we started, I just love the topics you bring up, and it's so open and honest conversations, and surrounded by a lot of really great Irish, particularly people, and on important topics like mental health, as that's how we kind of connected originally.
Yeah. Aoife, I suppose let's pitch psychosexual therapy. Like I was thinking back before the podcast, and I was thinking about how when we had Bren, or your man in Shawnee Davitt on, and he has an MA, I think, in sports psychology. So, and he was trying to explain like that really with sports psychology, it's really just psychology in a sporting environment. Is it the same with psychosexual therapy, that in the end you're just going back to mental health and the need for therapy in the first place?
Yes and no. I think yes, in the sense that we can't really separate our mental health and our sexual health and ourselves from each other. And so a lot of the work that I would do would be going back to childhood years and understanding and using different modalities to kind of cater and hone in on what's happening for the person generally. And then we get more specific, just like that sports psychology aspect. But what we can do in psychosexual therapy, which I worked in the NHS for a few years, is short-term work. So you actually wouldn't really kind of go back deeply into the childhood components and just work with the person in front of you here and now. So you use things like CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. So in a sense, you can avoid going through that, but I kind of see it as a plaster, not a stitch, to be honest. It doesn't necessarily always last that long.
As in, which is the plaster? As in
the short-term therapy, so CBT, sometimes means that it doesn't necessarily get to the root of the problem. And so people may tend to come back, which is what I've experienced quite a bit. So it depends on what somebody wants to work with. Some people may say, I only want to do 8 sessions, and I go, okay, cool. And sometimes that works.
That's interesting, Aoife, because I suppose with mental health, there's something new every week, whether it's Wim Hof or, and we love talking about it, and, I love it anyway. I'm always dipping into very hippy-dippy podcasts. So like there's a new technique for everything. So you as a psychotherapist, do you think that psychotherapy is the only way that can really get to the root of issues?
I think it would be very close-minded of me to say that. I don't think that's fair to people who don't necessarily find benefits of psychotherapy, and I'm biased to that. So things like Wim Hof is really brilliant, and actually something that I encourage people to do. Breathing is so important and has so many you can really impact our vagus nervous system, our nervous system in general, and that massively impacts psychosexual things like erectile dysfunction. Breathing, mindfulness is key. It's just so beneficial, and the problem is there's just not enough study and research done, clinical research done on it.
Yeah. I just have a question if what you're saying about sort of childhood as opposed to the present person that's there. You reckon a lot of things that would problems that would occur with someone in their sexual relationships in adulthood would stem from childhood, or do you find it can be stuff that can be accrued along the way as they grow?
I think definitely accrued along the way. And, it is different yet again for everybody. But if we look at sex and the narratives we hold around sex, that tends to stem from the messages we received about sex. And those don't just, happen overnight. It's not like I use that, the little Google that you Google yellow person, you're not just suddenly in an area. It's like happens like osmosis. It just kind of, gradually comes up and gradually kind of filters in. So messages that maybe you receive from parents or carers, or the lack of sex lack of sex education, if particularly in this country, mixed messages, and also things like self-esteem, self-worth. Those are parts of our sexual selves too.
I suppose we have to go, like, geography and our country and our culture is going to have is there any difference between how you've worked in England versus Ireland, without getting into specifics, obviously?
We know that we have a long way to go in terms of separating the church and state still, as we know from the news recently around National Maternity Hospital. But I think particularly that narrative has just been there around our sex education in schools, or yet again lack thereof. I think my sex education I was fifth year in school, when an all-girls school where they had two men coming into us telling us don't have sex, and if you take the pill you'll go to hell. Genuinely, we're like, you will go to hell because it's contraception. And so there's a long way to go versus the UK, which doesn't have that emphasis of religion, I think, particularly. So but we're getting there.
What, looking at your, like, obviously it must be very exciting to be doing a PhD in psychotherapy, but just contrasting your experience in the psychiatric setting versus the psychotherapeutic setting. There must be a major difference there, is there?
Yeah, I don't think I've been asked about my psychiatry, my nursing background for a very long time. So some are very thought-provoking questions, and I probably need to do a bit more reflection. She says as a psychotherapist. Worrying. No, but I think I worked as a psychiatric nurse for, I trained, I qualified, and then I moved to the UK and I did a master's in war and psychiatry. So the mental health effects of war. So from my perspective, there's a huge difference. And there's an issue with the separation of psychiatry and psychotherapy. And there's always been a bit of a clash throughout, whether we're going to go back to Freudian days or not. There's always been issues with that. And so I think, yet again, there's aspects I remember and I reflect back and I go, God, like antipsychotics have huge impact on sexual functioning. Antidepressants have huge impact on sexual functioning, decreased desire, inability to orgasm, delayed ejaculation, erectile dysfunction. So, the problem is, if somebody's not feeling very well, if they're psychotic, or they've got a diagnosis of schizophrenia and they've been put on some medication, they may end up with erectile dysfunction, for example. And as a result, sometimes that's negated. That problem is negated for them when they're sitting in a room full of people. And I witnessed that as not being as important, because it's more important that they stay on their medication. So as much as I'm an advocate for medication, I also think there's an important part of bringing in the psychotherapeutic aspects to more holistic way of treating people.
Very interesting. Mark, do you have any comments or thoughts?
Not on that, Aoife, but there's just something interesting I found. I was listening to a podcast there earlier that you done on intrusive thoughts. And I found that absolutely fascinating. Like, because we all have them, but we never address them properly. It's like, oh no, I don't want to think that, and I'm definitely not going to tell anyone I thought that.
Yes.
And it happens like every single day, and you do it, and it's like the worst. I found it's like the worst possible thing that could happen, or the worst possible thing I could do right now. What is it? And it comes up out of nowhere. And it's actually, it's strange, because I was listening to something else during the week, and it said that you find your thoughts in the same, or your thoughts find you in the same way that you'd find a table when you walk into a room. You didn't put that table there. So if you walk into a restaurant and you find the table, that's the way you kind of find the thought. It's just kind of there.
Yeah.
It's not you that made the thought.
Yeah.
And I like, that's what I found very helpful from your podcast. That was, you know, it's not you. You're not a bad person because you thought this. These are just things that are happening.
Yes. And it's one of my favorite things to work with, because if you look at the statistics, it's like, obviously all papers are different, but you're talking over 90% of people experience intrusive thoughts, but very rarely spoken about. And they're so dark. Those thoughts seem to be, I'm going to drop this baby, or I'm going to, I'm going to intentionally crash my car, or I'm going to step in front of this train. And so people don't talk about it, and they think it's a bad thing. And I know if you've listened to this podcast, you hear me waffling on about it. If we think it's a bad thing, we push it down, then where it's shrouded with shame. And that's really difficult then, because it leaves people feeling very isolated. Yet 90% of us are experiencing that. And like that, our thoughts are just thoughts. They're just things that sometimes come in and go out, and they're nothing to do with who we are as a person. And they're not facts as well, which is something I also harp on about. They're just sentences sometimes. They're just words put together. So I think it's a really interesting topic, considering we just don't speak about it enough.
Yeah, there was a comedian, I don't know if you know Bill Burr, but he kind of done a piece on it in his stand-up comedy. It's saying, do you ever think like you're driving along on the side of the street and your hands up, and it's like, if I just went 10 seconds to the left, I could be on the news. 10 degrees.
Yeah. And it's funny, because I've had people come into me and they go, I had this terrible thought, and in my head, and the odd time I've shared it, and I've said, yeah, I've had that thought too. I've held babies and thought, oh my God, I'm going to purposely drop it. And so I hand it straight back. But actually, it's just anxiety.
Yeah. It's very strange. I just remembered, like, sometimes when I was in school when I was younger, I'd be up getting my homework corrected by the teacher, and he wouldn't be giving out to me, and I'd just be looking at my homework, and I think I could punch this guy in the side of the head right now. Imagine what would happen then. Like, that's just kind of what comes into your head, and you have to restrain it.
Yeah. Do you think it's always been like that, Aoife, or do you think we're more likely to have intrusive thoughts now in a busier society?
Good question. Well, intrusive thoughts tend to be correlated with anxiety or depression or OCD. Right. So, or PTSD. There's some study done on that too. So we are living in a more stressful world, particularly in the last 18 months, right? But we are living in a more stressful world. And so I definitely think that there's probably, an influx of intrusive thoughts happening, but hopefully things like having this conversation, or the podcast that I did, when I think I was asked, what would you like to talk about? And I was like, intrusive thoughts, because you can talk all day about lots of mental health things, but it's rare that you think of something as bad as, oh, I think I'm going to stab this person. What if I do? Am I a bad person? So podcasts like this, conversations around mental health just start to deconstruct those narratives that we have.
Yeah. Just as you give that example, I think of what's that famous one from Jung, that what we ignore becomes something about it becomes fate or something.
I know what you're talking about, but I definitely don't remember the the exact quote. Okay. But I know that's so true.
Sorry. Well, we're bound to a tweet or something. But sorry, just to figure it, or just to place it in context, I was just wondering then, like, where, like, as a psychotherapist today, what do you, when you look back in the past and say Freud and Jung 100 years ago, like, obviously your speciality is kind of emerged in the 1980s, but is it like, is it all part of the same hymn sheet, if they like, or is it all part of the same movement of thinking, or would you challenge some of the thoughts that they came up with back 100 years ago?
Yeah, I definitely challenge some of Freud's thoughts, and I'm doing some reading on critical theory around queer theory, really, and challenging some of those narratives around previous narratives around homosexuality. But there's lots that I would challenge, but I think they're pretty isolated, and I think they're very generalized by a lot of psychotherapists, and not all, of course. But I also think there's a hell of a lot of stuff which is still so important. Perhaps the language is slightly different, So there's more modernizing of some of the vocabulary that we use. So kind of what you're talking about there in that young example is thought suppression, we would probably use now. So suppressing your thoughts, and any of the research you look at, the more you suppress your thoughts, the stronger they get. And so it's about, perhaps it's about evolving, I suppose, and medicine's evolving, and therefore psychology is evolving. So it goes with, I think there's a lot of positive changes that are being made, but most psychology is interlinked. That's why there's so many of us that kind of use a range of modalities. So we're integrative.
Sorry, is there any methods you have, like, therapy can be expensive, and for some people it might not be as accessible, but is there anything that, like, say someone at home that is they know they're suppressing their thoughts and they know they can't do it, but like always have that natural inclination when something bad comes up, it's like, no, I'm not going to think about that, I'm busy, I have other stuff to think about, and it goes down and it goes deeper. But is there anything that, like, someone can work on at home, or practices they can use to sort of help not to do that, to be more engaged with their emotions and how to deal with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I would start off with mindfulness. And I prefix this with saying sometimes when we're highly anxious, mindfulness may not be useful because our thoughts may be too dark and dangerous, and therefore we may need that extra help, from GP, from medication, etc. as well. So what I would say is mindfulness is really good, because what you're talking about is restructuring the brain, the neurotransmitter, the neurosynapses, but also the brain is malleable, so you can change the kind of architecture of it. And so something like Headspace is brilliant, and Buddhify is another app, or Calm. If it's psychosexual, what I would be suggesting is, there's loads of apps now that have been developed which are brilliant. So there's one called Furley, and I can send you guys through the link for that if that helps, I don't know, in terms of resources for people.
Yeah.
There's Furley, which is particularly for women, kind of, or vulva owners, in mindful masturbation. Like, I've done one on attachment styles in there as well. So it's about, it's yet again, it's a bit more holistic than just sexual functioning, I suppose. And then there's Mojo Men, which is for premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction. And then there is also a new one called Blue. Oh God, sorry. They just contacted me the other day, actually, and I've totally forgotten their name, but they're for couples as well. So I can send you through those, but there are a few different apps that are really helpful. And there's loads of books as well that are brilliant to get a better understanding of yourself. So yeah, but therapy is expensive. It is expensive. But there are loads of low costs therapists too. So find people on, like, I offer some sliding scales. I'm fully booked on them at the moment, but that's also an option too.
I'd add to your resources if you were in psychosexual therapy in your own website. Not that I have any other resources.
Tell me more.
I was taking your graphics on Instagram are always striking, but your blog gives you the room to explore thoughts in more detail, and they are very. I actually really liked your one on such an interesting one. What we see in our external world reflects how we see our external, or there must be a Freudian slip there. What we see in our reflects how we see our internal world. And so that would connect it to epistemology. So
No, you said it right. I was just
right. Okay. So yeah, I just wonder, like, what does as a therapist, like, it could be you could just take the back seat and just take your clients and keep that a very blank professional page, but yet you feel the need, I think, to make psychotherapy modern, relevant, and to bring it through with an Instagram page and a blog. What is that your motive, do you think? What do you like about bringing a blog into the and making this resource available?
Yeah, I think I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Instagram, to be honest, and maybe you guys can relate.
Yep.
Sometimes I'm just like, oh yeah, brilliant, can't wait to post this up, and then other times I just think, what am I doing here? And just that very, I think, normal, understandable comparison game, imposter syndrome. Do I have anything to contribute to, and what? I'm sure I can swear on this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What the fuck are these algorithms? But to me, there's a few things. It's firstly because therapy in itself, as a therapist, it's a lonely world a lot of the time when you're private practice, and it's given me a huge resource to build and connect with other therapists, but also for my own learning, because people, particularly when we talk about sex education, people are posting things all the time that are inspiring me and helping me talk to clients or perhaps think in a different way. And that's really important, that I challenge my narratives and viewpoints and scripts that I have. The next part would be education, that there's, particularly yet again in this country, there just isn't enough adult, healthy, good quality sex education out there. Not that I'm contributing to all of those boxes, but it's trying to get that narrative. I keep using the word narrative today. I don't know why it's in my head, but to kind of debunk some myths and like challenge some of the shame that's out there, challenge some of the stigma and misinformation. But most importantly for me, and this is, I think, a big part of why I got into therapy in the first place almost, is I just cannot deal with the thought of people feeling alone. And if I can contribute in some way for someone to feel a little bit more normal and a little bit more okay, then my job is done, like and it doesn't matter where in the world they are or what age they are. If I can just help someone feel a little bit more at peace with themselves and less alone, that's my Instagram post is the best of all Instagram posts.
I'm sure it's needed as well, like because of the lockdowns and stuff like that. It's going to be hard for people to get back out there, I suppose, and to go on dates and meet people again, and sort of even to be vulnerable with them when they meet them as well, so it's important to have these topics. I think
that was connected to your 21st of June post. That's a very similar vein of form, isn't it?
Say that again.
You put up a post about the 21st of June. And
the 21st of June. Yeah, I was like, what's the 21st of June? Yes, of course, because of course it was, it was even moved by the lovely Boris, but yeah, so that's why I was looking. But yes, absolutely, it's that sense of you're be ready when you're ready, and that not measuring yourself by anybody else's stick.
That's beautiful, that passion that you have for therapy. And you mentioned before in a post, I think, that you were 14 when you got your first book about therapy, I think. And was it always sort of a passion then, like when you were younger, to kind of show people that, to help people to see the wood from the trees?
Yeah, good expression. Yeah, so when I was younger, I think I just wanted to work in mental health. I had no idea really about therapy, my first book is by a guy called Eric Byrne, who was like a student or a follow-up of Freud's, and kind of took it to a new level with a transactional analysis. And I don't, like, now I'm struggling to read some of Eric Byrne's stuff, so I don't know how I quite managed. That book is falling apart. And I just always wanted to help people, in the most basic way I could find, and whatever way that kind of looked for me growing up. And then it just evolved, like I just started doing different jobs and adding to different areas that I was interested in, and that has been, I suppose, my bit of my journey. I had no idea that I'd end up not literally here. I'm very glad I'm literally here, but I had no idea that I'd end up being in private practice as a therapist.
Just, I suppose we better talk a bit more about sex, like, and its role and
Fabulous.
what happens with with psychosexual therapy. Like, is it refreshing to rekindle connections, to deepen intimacy? Is that the role of psychosexual therapy?
Yeah, good question. Is the role of psychosexual therapy? Yes, I would say so. But not isolated to couples. That actually that reconnection can be with yourself. I mean, and I was only talking about this earlier, the importance of getting to know yourself so that you can articulate what you need to another person, and whether that's sex or not, it doesn't matter, but being more clear and more concise and with a more depth of understanding, then we can be able to form better relationships with others. Intimacy, vulnerability are key. Attachment and authenticity. Sorry. And authenticity, I think I'd throw in.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Attachment comes up a bit, I'd say, as well, but in that it's just when you mentioned there expressing our needs and how sometimes attachment can cause a rupture in that, you're not expressing your needs properly. I was actually only listening to a podcast today from it was with Michaela Peterson and John Smith, Lane Smith or something, Andrew Lane Smith. Oh, well, anyway, he's focused on he's a psychotherapist in England, or no, America, and he's focused solely on attachment and how drawing on that, and it was a very interesting podcast. But does that resonate with you? Like, how does attachment come up, or does it?
Yeah, it does come up. Attachment style by John Bowlby is a vital tool in psychosexual and relationship therapy. I mean, it tends to be used in general psychotherapy anyway, and I use it very often. Like you said, that rupture originates at the younger years, from between the child and the caregiver, and it plays out then in adult relationships. So a lot of our distress as a child, unless healed, for want of a better term, plays out in our adult relationships. And so you've got the different attachment styles, 4 different attachment styles. And what I try to do is get people to understand what theirs is, how it plays out, what it looks like, how do you know when it's being activated or triggered, and then find a way to gauge into more effective communication, articulating what you need. And that's really helpful. But bringing the sex part in, because that's my
go for it, Aoife. Yeah.
is that it plays out in the bedroom too. And so you've got, couples who perhaps distance themselves, and you've got people who are like, the avoidant attachment style would maybe distance themselves, or the anxious one may pursue. So what ends up happening is there's a fallout in communication, and what ends up happening is desire discrepancy a lot of the time. So we've got people who have a lower and a higher libido, and then I see a couple in front of me saying, I'm not happy with our sex life.
Can that be reconciled?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you reckon it's a hormonal thing or a communication thing again?
Tends to be communication, tends to be pent up resentment. Anxiety is huge. That's one of the big things, because there's then that sense of, I'm going to be rejected by this person, and so the fear of initiating sex, and then that other person thinking, oh, they're going to initiate sex, like I better get into my full length pajamas ASAP so that they don't find me sexy and fall asleep very quickly. And so it comes from a place of anxiety. So sometimes it's about just getting accustomed to the discomfort of the anxiety and working through it. So I use there was a Masters and Johnsons, who were the kind of sexual health pioneers back in the 1960s, have this thing called sensate focus. And so the whole idea is, although it's very dated and I write my own because it's the 1960s and women aren't in the kitchen all the time, is I write my own, and it's, I think a few therapists do, taking away, say it's a straight couple, taking away like intercourse until 8 weeks time, 9 weeks time, and working through it by physical touch, massages, connection, some kind of more fun games, and just reconnecting with each other so that anxiety just decreases. And yeah, so then hopefully towards the end you're feeling a lot more connected with each other.
It's interesting. All right, I was reading on your one of your blog posts about the 5-minute eye contact thing.
Yeah,
that seems challenging. Like I read that, I don't know about that.
I think he even gave a bit of a louse. He said 3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, that is in there. That's in my sensei focus, and there's a few things that I know. So one of the other things that's in there, which I don't think I've done a blog post on, but you've inspired me, Mark, is drawing each other's genitals.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, painting, preferably painting. I don't know. Are you blushing? I can't see through.
No, I'm just looking at Mark's other artwork here. Just wondering what it fits in. I don't think so. But anyway, that's fascinating. Right? But like, where did that come from?
Lots of young men draw their own genitals on their school books and things like that.
I've got a few school books I could probably dig out. Yeah, no, the eye contact, the eye gazing is soul gazing is actually from Tantra. But it's just about trying to find something a little bit different. I always say to people, put on a song or two, because otherwise it's just silence and you get the giggles, or it gets awkward. But it is a really difficult task. And then the genital ones, I think, I don't really know where I came up with it, unless it's I've been doing it for so long, I don't know. But it's just about having a bit of fun, but also then going, oh, well, I like it when you touch here. I don't like this. I like this. I don't like this. Could you do more of? And hopefully being able to have a little bit of a conversation about enjoyment, pleasure.
Yeah, it lightens the mood, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fashion,
yeah. But fun is so important, because when we're having fun, we don't tend to be anxious. When we're laughing, we forget for a moment, right?
Yeah.
About what's going on for us. So that's what I kind of try and get people to get into as well.
Yeah, it lets their guard down, so they don't feel like they're being accused of being incompetent, or they're being accused of just being greedy or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Jenny, that was a beautiful few moments there. And even just the thought of that, or those examples, instantly, I feel a bit lighter anyway. It kind of takes away the connotations a bit around sex. And I suppose you've mentioned before how there's a silence around sex. So like, where do you think we are? Obviously, you mentioned in the broader terms of things as a society, that there's more untangling to be done at a political level. But like, what on a personal level, where do you think we can bring this to? Is it simple things by looking at your Instagram post, or where do you think this conversation needs to go?
I think it needs to, I think we as a country perhaps need to open, don't say open our minds, because that's just too general and I can't expect that of people, but open the radio stations, open the TV, open the podcasts. And there's a really good podcast, Pause Vibes, I don't know if you've heard of it, talking about HIV experiences. And there's also a new transgender, I can't remember what it's called, which is terrible, but it's brand new, and it's about I suppose, and then there's obviously as well Caroline West, who does Glow West too, and then there's Sarah Sproul, who talks about childhood sex education. And so it's about listening to people. I think it's about having more honest conversations with ourselves and with each other. It's a really big part is the sex education, because our sex ed is minimal to none, and it's very anatomical, and we talk about actually, I actually don't really know exactly if they talk about erectile dysfunction, but then we talk about erections, right, in like biology in school, and we talk about the importance of male sexual functioning, and yet women are negated, like the clitoris isn't mentioned, or like female pleasure isn't mentioned, or female orgasms aren't mentioned, and consent isn't spoken about. It's no means no. Consent is so more complex than no means no. Healthy relationships, I think that's key. I think a lot of people could be out of unhealthy and toxic relationships, or not get into them, if they had the education at school around what a healthy relationship looks like. So I think it needs to start young, and I think it in schools, but also I think it needs in our age group, we need to start listening to people who perhaps fit outside the norms that yesterday's Instagram post, the norms of what fits into society, I suppose, in terms of those kind of conversations, and yeah, stretch and grow ourselves. That would be probably a lot to ask. But
Yeah. Do you think it will ever come into the school system? Because as you said, it's purely anatomical what we learn, and it's just baseline anatomy of it as well. Like, we're not taught about empathy and compassion and how to deal with relationships and things like this. And then you end up in all kind. It's basically figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
Learn as you go. Whereas you can avoid certain situations and certain hardships if you're actually taught, you're given the correct information. But you have to find out for yourself, like now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And even on that point of finding young people finding out for themselves, porn. That's what young people, are going to start turning to more as the digital age grows. And I have no issues with porn. I have an issue with it being used as sex education.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic body standards. It's it's a show, it's a movie, there's a production crew there.
Circus sometimes.
Absolutely. And so it's about being able to, explain to kids that actually, there's noises, lube is needed, you may lose an erection. Actually, sex may be painful. If sex is painful, stop, have a conversation about it. Those things are just so important and happen all the time, but aren't on in any form of really sex education, unless you're an adult and you're listening to some good podcasts or reading some good Instagram posts.
Yeah, it was all of a lot of self-flagellation anyway, and a lot of self-criticism and arguments in relationships and blaming other people for things that are natural and happen anyway. I think it's a very important thing to look at maybe for the future.
Yeah, and I think I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot of things like, oh, he didn't get an erection, he doesn't fancy me. Oh, we didn't have penetration, so therefore we didn't have sex. That's just an example, where sex is whatever you want it to be, kind of find it to be. So it's about kind of breaking down some of those things that actually are really not conducive to a healthy relationship and healthy sense of self too.
Yeah. I think podcasts like this are good as well, and we were just saying before, like, it's strange that a sex therapist would even want to come on to our podcast, because it's such a wide variety of people that come on and topics and listeners, and then there's people that never would have really exposed themselves to this topic that would be listening anyway, because they listen to our podcast, and I think maybe they learn a couple of things that could help them in their own personal lives. So I think the wider we can spread this message is any way we can is good.
Yeah, and I like when you said about coming on, most of my conversations are with other sexual experts, whatever we want to define that as being, and that's all well and good, but those are sex education podcasts. And so what you're going into when you're signing up to it, subscribing to it or whatever it may be. And the thing is, we need to normalize conversations around sex. And part of that is talking about it alongside tarot card readings, because
speaking of
but it's exact, the thing is, it's about, like, as I say, it's like making a cup of tea, because then people are less likely to feel alone. And then people are less likely to feel ashamed. And that's not okay. Nobody should be feeling that way when things are, accessible and out, like out there in the open, rather than this hidden away, even if it is hidden away in these, podcasts. At least someone may stumble on something I've said or you guys have said that goes, that's really relatable. Actually, I didn't know I was, struggling with intrusive thoughts, and that they're okay.
Yeah.
I'm just looking back. Another question I had was about navigating moments of self-betrayal. That was one of your Instagram posts, and I just thought it was interesting then, because it's grand. We hear you gave a few examples of phrases that we use that could be self-betrayal, like it's grand, oh no, it's fine, don't worry about that, and as a result of that, I was wondering, like, is creating the environment for discussion around this an important quality as well, to show people that, it's about time you let go of that, or, you can actually stand up for yourself there. And this is something we all navigate. Like, I'm certainly one for it anyway. So where does that figure in terms of psychosexual therapy and therapy as a whole?
I think, I think one of, this is just in the corner of my eye. So I have this book, Reinvent. I can't see myself, so I presume you guys can see it.
Yeah, we have it.
Reinventing Your Life, which is a guy called Jeffrey Young, who developed schema therapy, and it's really good book. I highly recommend it. And one of the things in it, it talks about these little life traps that we fall into, right? And like obstacles and patterns of behavior that repeat over time. And sometimes it's really difficult to drop the blinkers and gain perspective. And although this is general schema therapy, there's parts in those patterns of behavior. For example, self-sacrificing or subjugating is kind of negating your own needs and placing somebody else's more important. And that doesn't just happen outside of the bedroom, it happens in the bedroom too. And I think it's about recognizing when there's certain patterns of behavior that make you feel really bad afterwards, that leave you feel really low, flat, feelings of discomfort, whatever it may be, angry, sad, etc. And being able to find out why these happen, making those little changes to allow yourself to have those conversations and encouraging yourself to have those conversations. So recognizing those self-betrayals of letting yourself down tends to be left with a feeling. It tends to be a residue. And once you understand that residue, it's kind of going, okay, well, what had I done? How did I let myself down? What could I do differently? I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, and it kind of, that residue could be connected then to trauma, because it's kind of similar to how you described, or not how you described is similar to how Gabor Mate describes. When the break-in, the refusal of the child for a need or a want, then that's buried down, and those layers. And yeah, I think it's similar there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he's fantastic, and talking about trauma and how that is sticks with us. As he says, it lives in the body. Doesn't live in the memory, it doesn't live in the head, it lives stored in the body. And so that's when that residue, that feeling is left. That's a good indicator, that's a good signal. Ding ding ding, that's a signal around shame, that's a signal around guilt.
Yeah, that's great. The way to break the pattern is sort of just to tell the truth, isn't it? That takes a certain level of bravery to yourself first. I suppose you have to tell the truth to yourself of why you're feeling like that, and then you have to be brave enough to tell your partner as well. And that's kind of the only way to fix it, isn't it? Is to tell the truth. How are you going to solve it if no one knows what the fucking problem is?
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me think of Brene Brown talking about vulnerability and courage, and how they're this interlinked. They're one and the same. To be vulnerable is to have courage, and but it's really difficult, and it takes a lot of compassion, which she also talks about in terms of like the antidote to shame. And so it's kind of back to what you kind of spoke about earlier around knowing yourself. And once you know yourself, you can start articulating how you feel. And that doesn't happen overnight. It does take time, patience, and compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're saying, like, courage is a good word for it as well, isn't it? Because like for something to be courageous, there has to be an element of risk attached to it as well. You know, there has to be vulnerability on the other side. On the one side of courage has to be vulnerability. You are taking the risk, like with saying something that's true, because they can be shot back at you and it can hurt. So you have to just trust fate that if you tell the truth, it's for the best. Like.
Yeah. And that's why I used the word authenticity earlier, because it's about living a truthful life, and that truthful life being authentic to yourself. But in order to grow and stretch ourselves, we have got to be vulnerable, and vulnerability is scary, it's daunting. But like you said, if we don't, we're just immobilized, and we keep in the same state, keep in the same patterns. And toxic relationships are maintained, you know, or whether that's with yourself or with others.
Yeah, you have to pick your poison.
Yeah,
take the risk of staying the hell you're in, I suppose.
Yeah. And we've all done that in our lives. I'm sure you guys have done it, not yet again, in relationships, or like, you know, staying in a job or staying on a college course or something that isn't you know the way you want to live your life, and that includes relationships too.
Yeah.
And relationships include sex. So just back in the sex note.
If
you're not having a healthy sex
always
life,
back to sex for two.
You got me.
Well, I thought we kind of ended there on a bit of a dimmer note. So let's hope that flash flood can rise us up. I don't know if he can or not. Have you heard flash flood, Aoife?
Oh, what's flash flood?
You could have 8 sessions there with flash flood.
He's a friend of ours who sort of contributes something to the podcast every week, a little voice note.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that before.
You find it affectionate. Oh,
it's the first.
I'm excited. It's just a bit of wisdom.
Well, let's see what it is, because we don't listen to it.
Right.
Lads, I tell you something. If I hear the words "football's coming home" in England one more time, I'm going to get a dose of the vomits. It absolutely sicken you to carry on them. Like, Jesus Christ, a massive footballing country and haven't won anything since 1966. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. Absolutely ashamed of themselves. The players they've had and they've produced. Like, do me a favour. Just carry on to beat Germany in a game. Not even, like, you know, late stages. Like, last 16. Not even quarter final. They're doing a lap of the pitch. Come on. Like, who do these guys think they are?
We've gone so off topic.
Well, not that. Well, yeah.
Shame was there. We had shame.
Yeah, shame was there. Anxiety was there. Maybe a bit of anger as well. But it's funny because I had in one of my friends' WhatsApp groups from London, and it's the partners as well. And one of the guys was at the match.
Oh, you're frozen.
Yesterday.
Oh, now you're back.
I froze.
Yeah, you're back.
That's all right. Sorry, I'm back. One of the guys was at the match yesterday, and after they won, sent videos of them singing "Football's Coming Home," and I was like, really? You in one match?
So you're with Flash there.
I'm totally, you can tell him. I'll be listening to the end. I must have been missing the end of the podcast or something.
Yeah, he's always at the end. We always put him as a footnote there.
I love,
but I suppose just to, like, we were talking about picking your poison and all, and again, I'm always dipping in and out and stuff. And at the moment, my screensaver is "Follow Your Bliss, and the universe will open doors for you where there were only walls." Joseph Campbell. And so I'd like to kind of throw that in there as well to try and, you know, while there's poison there, you can find a bliss too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's always poison somewhere. There is about 2 bottles of it in my fridge.
It's but I suppose it's the balance of good and evil, isn't it? I mean, Jung was big on that, and sure, a lot of writers were. What was it? Your man who wrote Gulag Archipelago, your man, that's there's a thin line that runs down the middle of each heart and between good and evil. So it's no surprise that we lead there.
Well, I think talking on Jung there is the shadow self, and that we do carry a darker part of ourselves, and that's riddled with shame, and that's a part he says we need to talk about and open up to, and acknowledge. So, and that's a way of finding your bliss.
Yes.
Become content with the whole part of yourself.
Yes.
Not excluding the shadow.
I think we've probably talked more about psychotherapy than psychosexual therapy, so maybe we still have work to do. Well, I do anyway. I have let you take the reins with that sex, Aoife, and work away with it. You, all right. But I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Mark, have you any other questions or anything?
No, I have two. I want to thank you very much, Aoife, for your time. It was great, and I think hopefully this podcast will help some people who might need it.
Yeah.
Good.
One more thing that we do at the end of a podcast, Aoife, is we get a book. Where's the book? And we read from a random page from Liam Dunn. He was a Wexford hurler. So this man wrote a very honest autobiography, and we pick a page from it. So you can pick a page from 286 and between 1 and 286.
Okay, so I'm going to go with 192.
Okay. Oh, well, when we trotted out onto Wexford Park for the first league game, you could almost hear the disbelief that greeted us, because most of the team were like Oompa Loompas. Jericho had gone absolutely huge after a winter of enjoying life as an All-Ireland champion. But he wasn't the only one doing the impressions of Mr. Blobby. Gary Laffin and Tom Dempsey certainly bore no resemblance to Kate Moss, and I was a good stone over it myself. What a body shame there as well, Aoife. I think you need to come down to Wexford and have a good chat with us.
That is absolutely fine. I know Feathered on Sea very well. It's a big family place for us historically. Absolutely. But no, thank you guys for having me on. I mean, I really appreciate it and having the chats. And I said when you sent me a message originally, I'd sent your podcast to my other half, and I said, what do you think, should I go on? And he was like, they're brilliant. And then I said it to him yesterday, you guys, we'd organize a time finally, and he was like, yes. So he was going to be delighted too, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you for asking me on, and I'm really happy to be here. Was really happy to be here.
Us too. Thanks very
so much,
Aoife.
All right, guys.
Cheers.
See you later. Bye.
Take care.